What if you took a photograph of someone, and only later discovered that the person standing beside you had been dead for years? Throughout American history, there have been photographs that appear to show something that simply shouldn't be there. A mysterious woman sitting inside an old cemetery. A strange figure inside an abandoned hospital. A ghostly soldier appearing on a Civil War battlefield. The supposed spirit of Abraham Lincoln, and a mysterious child standing in a dark doorway. Some of these photographs have been called proof of ghosts. Others have been explained as camera tricks, double exposures, shadows, or simple mistakes. But the stories behind them are what make these photographs so disturbing. Tonight, we're looking at 5 alleged ghost photographs from America. And we're going to explain what happened, where the photographs came from, and what people believe they captured. But remember, these are paranormal claims. None of these photographs has been scientifically proven to show an actual ghost. Our first story takes us to a small cemetery outside Chicago, Illinois. Its name is Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. During the day, the cemetery may look like an ordinary old burial ground. But according to local legends, strange things have been reported here for decades. Visitors have claimed to see mysterious lights between the trees, figures walking among the graves, and people who suddenly disappear. But one photograph became especially famous. In 1991, Paranormal investigators were photographing the cemetery. They were documenting the area and taking pictures of the graves and surrounding woods. At the time, nothing appeared unusual. But when one of the photographs was later examined, something strange appeared. A woman seemed to be sitting near a gravestone. She looked almost completely normal. She wasn't surrounded by glowing light. She wasn't obviously transparent. She simply appeared to be sitting there, as if she belonged in the cemetery, and that was the disturbing part. According to the investigators, they didn't remember seeing a woman sitting there when the photograph was taken. So who was she? Over the years, different stories have been connected to the image. Some people claimed she was the spirit of a woman who had died in the cemetery. Others believed she could have been connected to one of the many tragedies associated with the area. But there is a major problem. There is no reliable evidence proving exactly who the woman was, or how she died, and that's important. Because ghost stories often grow over time, a mysterious photograph appears. Someone creates a theory about what it shows, and eventually the theory becomes part of the legend. So we can say the photograph is famous. We can say people believe it shows a ghost. But we cannot confidently identify the woman. And maybe that's what makes the image so unsettling, because if the figure really was there, someone appears to have been sitting alone among the graves, waiting for someone to notice her. Our next photograph takes us back to 19th century America. The country had just experienced one of the most devastating periods in its history. The Civil War had left families grieving across the nation. Thousands of people had lost husbands, sons, fathers, and brothers, and many people desperately wanted to believe that death wasn't the end. During this period, a strange form of photography became popular. It was known as spirit photography. One photographer became particularly famous for it. His name was William H. Mumler. Mumler claimed that his camera could capture spirits that couldn't normally be seen by the human eye. And then came one of his most famous photographs. The photograph supposedly showed Mary Todd Lincoln, the widow of President Abraham Lincoln. Behind her, there appeared to be the faint figure of Abraham Lincoln. Imagine the situation. Mary Lincoln had lost her husband to assassination. She was grieving. And suddenly, a photograph appeared to show Lincoln standing behind her, as if you were still watching over her. To believers, the photograph was incredible. It seemed like a message from beyond the grave. But skeptics had a very different explanation. Photography at the time already allowed techniques such as double exposure and composite images, and Mumler's work eventually came under serious suspicion. He was accused of producing fraudulent spirit photographs. His case eventually went to court, where he was acquitted. But the controversy surrounding his photographs never disappeared. So was Abraham Lincoln actually standing behind Mary? There is no scientific evidence proving that. The image can be explained through photographic techniques, but whether you believe in ghosts or not, the photograph remains fascinating, because it captures something very real. The grief of a woman who had lost her husband, and a society desperate to believe that the dead could somehow return. And when you look at the photograph today, You can still see the faint figure behind Mary Lincoln. A familiar face, appearing from the darkness. Now we're heading to Louisville, Kentucky. And this time, we aren't going to a cemetery. We're going inside one of America's most famous abandoned hospitals, Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Waverly Hills became known for treating patients suffering from tuberculosis. During the worst years of the disease, tuberculosis was extremely dangerous. Many people entered the hospital hoping to recover, but some never left alive. Eventually, the sanatorium closed, but the stories didn't disappear. Over the years, visitors and paranormal investigators reported hearing footsteps, seeing strange shadows, and experiencing unexplained activity inside the building. Then came the photographs. Investigators from the Louisville Ghost Hunters Society photographed different areas of Waverly Hills. In some photographs, strange shapes appeared. One image appears to show a mysterious face. Another seems to contain a human-like figure in or around the building. And one of the most famous images shows what appears to be a face looking from a window. The strange thing is, the investigators said some of these shapes weren't noticed when the photographs were taken. They were noticed later, when the images were examined. That's where the ghost theory begins. Some people believe the figures could be spirits of former patients who died inside the sanatorium. But there is another possibility. Old abandoned buildings are full of things that can confuse a camera. Low light, reflections, dust, shadows, motion blur, and long exposures can all create shapes that look surprisingly human. In fact, paranormal investigators themselves have demonstrated how ordinary objects and photographic effects can create images that look supernatural. So we have to ask, was Waverly Hills actually haunted? Or was the camera simply capturing something that our brains interpreted as a human figure? There is no confirmed answer. But imagine walking through Waverly Hills alone at night. The hallway is completely dark. You take a photograph, and when you look at it later, there's a face staring back at you, a face you don't remember seeing. That would be enough to make almost anyone look twice. But before we move on, look closely at this photograph. Do you see a ghost, or just a trick of the camera? Comment your answer below. Now, let's move to a place where thousands of soldiers died. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, July 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg. It was one of the most important battles of the American Civil War. For 3 days, Union and Confederate soldiers fought across the fields and hills around the town. Thousands were killed or wounded, and after the battle ended, the land was covered with the remains of a terrible conflict. Decades later, Gettysburg became famous for something else. Ghost stories. Visitors began reporting strange sounds, mysterious figures, and the appearance of soldiers who seemed to vanish moments later. Some photographs taken around the battlefield have also been described as showing ghostly figures. In some images, people claim to see men dressed like Civil War soldiers. In others, strange misty shapes appear in the background. The explanation from paranormal believers is simple: the soldiers died violently, and some of their spirits supposedly remain trapped on the battlefield. So imagine this: a photographer is standing on an empty field. It's late in the afternoon. The battlefield is quiet. The wind is moving through the trees. He takes a photograph. Nothing looks unusual. But later, when he examines the image, he notices something in the distance. A man, standing completely still. His clothing appears old. His body looks slightly transparent. And when the photographer looks back toward the exact spot, there's nobody there. That's the kind of story that has made Gettysburg one of America's most famous haunted locations. But again, there's a problem. Gettysburg has hundreds of legends, and not every photograph described as a Gettysburg ghost has enough evidence to identify the person supposedly captured. Fog can look like a person. A distant tree can look like a human body. A moving person can become distorted during a long exposure, and our brains are extremely good at finding faces and human shapes in random patterns. So the battlefield is real. The deaths are real. The photographs are real. But whether a particular photograph contains the spirit of a dead soldier remains unproven. Still, there's something deeply unsettling about standing on a battlefield where thousands of people died, and wondering if the past might somehow still be watching. And now, we come to our final photograph, the most disturbing one on this list. A photograph that appears to show a child standing inside a dark doorway. The location: Amityville, New York. In the 1970s, a house in Amityville became internationally famous after a series of horrific events. The house later became surrounded by stories of paranormal activity. Some of those stories were heavily disputed, others became part of popular culture. Eventually, paranormal investigators Ed and Lauren Warren became associated with the case. During an investigation connected to the property, photographs were taken, and one image became known as the Ghost Boy photograph. At first, it doesn't look like much. The photograph is dark, a doorway can be seen, and inside that doorway appears to be a small child. Two bright eyes seem to stare directly toward the camera. But here's what makes the image disturbing. According to the story surrounding the photograph, the people taking the pictures weren't expecting to photograph the child standing there. The figure was noticed later. And once people saw it, theories began appearing. Some claimed the child could be the spirit of a boy connected to the house. Others believed the image showed something paranormal. But there is no confirmed evidence proving that the figure was actually a dead child. There are also possible photographic explanations. Low light conditions can create strange shapes. A person can be partially hidden by darkness. Reflections and camera artifacts can produce bright spots that look like eyes. And the human brain naturally tries to turn unclear shapes into recognizable faces and bodies. But even knowing all of that, the photograph is still disturbing, because look at it again. There's a dark doorway, a small figure, and two bright points where the eyes should be. Imagine being alone inside an old house at night, taking photographs, and only later discovering that a child appears to be standing in the darkness. You look back at the room, nobody is there. You take another photograph, nothing, but the first photograph still shows the child. That's the kind of image that stays in your mind. And perhaps that's why the Amityville photograph became so famous. It doesn't show a monster. It doesn't show a transparent spirit floating through a wall. It shows something much more ordinary, a child, standing silently in a doorway. And somehow, that's even more frightening. 5 photographs, 5 locations, 5 stories surrounded by death, mystery, and unanswered questions. But are these photographs proof of ghosts? We can't say that. Some may have normal photographic explanations. Some may be misinterpretations. Some may have been manipulated. And others may simply remain unexplained. But one thing is certain, a photograph freezes a moment in time. And sometimes, when you look closely enough, you notice something you didn't see the first time. A face in the darkness, a figure standing in the distance, a woman sitting among the graves, or a child watching you from an empty doorway. So now I want to know, which photograph do you think is the most convincing? Comment 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 below, and tell me why. And if you enjoy disturbing American mysteries, haunted locations, and unexplained stories, subscribe to Limitless TV, because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't seeing a ghost. It's taking a photograph, and realizing you weren't alone.